Okay, looks like we got just about everyone here now, so let's get going here. So thank you for joining us this morning for the part 2 of training on Flex2Crystal. We're going to, in this webinar, we're going to do things a little bit different than the part 1 training where we went over converting a report and showing you some of the new features. Right off the bat, during this webinar, I want to let you know that if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question, you're welcome to. We'll unmute you and you can ask the question live on air and we'll answer it right then and there. So please feel free to do that. I'll try and keep an eye on that so that we can get those questions answered. The webinar is being recorded so that we can put it up for everyone to watch later if they want to. And it'll also have some additional documentation that comes along with it when we get it up there, and also a workspace will be put in place also. So let's go ahead and get going here. First off, we have a new demo workspace that we're going to be using for this webinar, and it's the workspace we'll be giving to you later. And basically it's a very simple little personal inventory application, and it's going to be something that will be available to show off some of the stuff related to Flex2SQL along with Flex2Crystal. And one of the things of note in this workspace is that we're using what's called SQL local DBs along with the version 12 drivers of Flex2SQL, which aren't quite out yet. So these local DBs basically are a way of having a SQL server that's mostly meant for developers, that's much easier to manage and install, much smaller install than a classical SQL Server install. I think it's about 25 to 30 megabytes, and it allows you to distribute the MDF and LDF files very easily. So this workspace is using that also. For this personal inventory application that we're going to be looking at, we're going to be building a very simple report today in relation to that piece of it, and we're going to be building this from scratch using ADO.NET. So to get started, if you'll recall, ADO.NET is a replacement for the CDO, and it uses XSDs instead of TTX files to describe the table that's going to be created in memory in Visual DataFlex. It's very similar to CDO, it's just a little bit newer way of doing things. So we're going to get started with actually creating a report, and we're going to take you through the entire report creation process. So let's get going here. First thing we're going to do is, since Flex2Crystal has focused up until this point on being able to convert reports easily, when it comes to report creation, the process is a little bit different, and as of right now, it's not quite as streamlined as it could be. And so we're going to do something that's a little bit different way of getting started here. If you'll notice in our workspace, the Mertech example workspace, we have a template report.rv. We're actually just going to start by making a copy of that, and we're going to rename it to replace pricing.rv. And this report that we're going to create is basically to show, based on the inventory that you have in your system, what replacement pricing for that inventory currently is. So we've made a copy of the report, and we're going to go into Visual DataFlex, open that file. And as you'll see here, this small template report has basically everything you need to get started on a Flex2Crystal report. We've got the Flex2Crystal object in here. We've got the start report that does the check for crystal environment stuff and gets the report started. So to do this initial version of the replace pricing, we're simply going to replace template report with replace pricing for the whole report. Okay, so now we have a report that's no longer a template version, is customized for this. So we're going to save that, and we're going to go into our Workspace Explorer here and add this report in. Okay. So now we have the report added into our project. We can go ahead and run it now, and you'll see as soon as it comes up here. Okay, you'll see our application here, which was meant for a little bit larger screen, as you can tell. Okay, so in this case we have a simple location entry screen. There's items down here for what we have at this location, a whole bunch of products, all this kind of stuff. So it's a fairly simple little application, just meant to illustrate some of the new features that we're going to be showing off in Flex2Crystal. And you can see we've got our empty report here that we just created, and this is what we're going to work on completing as we go through here. So now that we've got that started, we actually need to, as a first step, create the XSD file. Now, if you'll recall, the XSD file is what we use to describe the data that we're going to create in the in-memory array in VDF. Now, the way we have instructed to do that in our current documentation is requires Visual Studio. And I'm actually not going to illustrate it with Visual Studio. As of right now, it's the only way of doing it. You have to create a new project and create an XSD, and then basically you throw away the project, keep the XSD file, and use it in Visual Data Flex. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to show you this new tool that we've built just for Flex2Crystal to help you with the creation of XSD files. So this is the XSD generator. This isn't something that is available yet. It's going to be out for newer versions of Flex2Crystal. And it allows you to create this descriptor file. So let's get started. So our first field is going to be UPC lookup, system.string, and it's going to be 16 long. Our next one is going to be available at. If you notice, you can put spaces in the column names here without any problem at all. Again, string, 64 characters. Next up is URL. String again, and this is going to be 255 characters. Current price. And this is going to be system.decimal. And then last up, item ID. And this is going to be an int 32. So now we're going to save this file, and we're going to save it right into the data folder. We're going to call it upc.xsd. Okay, so now we've created that XSD. Now this process is extremely streamlined in comparison to the way that it's done in Visual Studio right now. It's very simplified for use by Flex2Crystal. So now what we're going to do is actually create an initial report that's going to use this. Actually, I don't want that. New blank report. Okay. So we're going to go in the database expert here, and if you'll notice the connection string here, local db \v11.0, again, this is the way that the local connection for SQL 2012 local db is accessed. That is the named instance of the connection here. Although, of course, you could just as easily do this entire thing using standard SQL Server. So we're going to go in here, and we need to add the items table from the local DB, and then we need to add our XSD. Now, I already have the XSD in here since, of course, I've done this before. But the way it's done, basically, this is an ADO.NET. I can go in, create a new connection, and all I need to do is, you'll see it's already got me here in my Mertech example data folder, pick the upc.xsd file and hit finish, and then I have that table here. Okay, so I've got both the tables I'm going to use for this report added. and I need to go ahead and link them. I couldn't auto-link them based on name here, so we're going to link them manually. We're going to link off of UPC. It's letting us know that we have multiple database drivers in use there. Okay, now what we're going to do is go ahead and add some columns in here. Let's see here. That, oh, about right there. Available at, we're going to do UPC lookup. Put that right next to it. Just shrink this down a bit. Next up, we're going to throw the current price on. And finally, we are going to throw the item ID on. And actually, we're going to take all of these and shift them over just a little bit here. Okay. Now, for this report, as you can see, we're making a fairly simple report, but we are going to add something a little different in here. We're going to add a picture. And we're going to start with, actually here, let's stretch out our detail section first and make it big enough for the picture. Okay. Okay. So right now we have an empty picture, but what we need to do is we're actually going to have this picture linked to an ADO.NET field. And it's going to be linked based on a URL. So what we do is we come into graphic location here, and we are going to set the graphic location to this URL here. Save and close. So now basically, instead of this empty.png, which is just a placeholder that we're using right now for the graphic, it's going to use the field that we've put in here in place of that to get the actual image for the report. Okay. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to show you how to make a barcode field, and this is how simple this is. Literally all we're going to do is say that we're going to turn this column into a code 39 field. Now, of course, UPCs aren't actually code 39 at all, but that's the built-in barcode that we have included here, so that's one that we're going to use. And literally, that's all we need to do to make a column into a barcode is say that we want to change it to a barcode, and we're done. So now let's go ahead and save this report, and we're going to save it as replace pricing. RPT. Okay, and we'll go ahead and close that. If we come back over into Visual Data Flex here and run our program again, when I go and actually click on OK here, I can bring up that report that I've just created. Of course, we don't have any data yet because we haven't created the ADO data source yet on the VDF side. So the next step is to actually go in on VDF and get this set up. The way we're going to do that, we're going to come right into our code here, and we actually have to do a little bit of cheating first. Originally, when I was creating the sample report for you guys, I had it reading from a SOAP data source. That SOAP data source has gone offline and isn't working the day before the webinar, of course, so we're going to fake it. So first off, I'm just going to copy and paste a little bit of code in here from a file I have that's going to fake our data source. And we'll put this right in here. Okay. So Our data source in this case was a SOAP call that basically returned details about a UPC barcode that we sent it. So you can see here we pass the UPC barcode, we get back a detail structure, and in this case it's just actually grabbing it from a local database, but we're just going to imagine that this is from a SOAP source for now. And you can see as part of this product details here, it's returning the UPC, a URL for the image, a price, a product URL, which we're not actually going to use right now, and a field called available at that tells us where that product can be purchased. So that's the data that we're going to push into this report using ADO. So to get started with it, the very first thing that we have to do is we have to go into our initialize report and tell Flex2Crystal that we're going to be using an ADO data source. And the way we do that is simply by calling this method. So send assign ADO data sources. That tells the report that it needs to go out and try and load ADO data, and the way that data is loaded is by firing off an event that you have to deal with. So that event is called load row data, and it takes, there we go, a HO data table and the S table property, and that's what's going to be passed to us that we actually load the ADO data from. So if anyone has any questions, remember you can unmute, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you, and you know, you can go ahead and ask a question in relation to anything I'm doing here. Okay. So the next step is going to be to set up some of the variables and various items that we'll need. So let's just set up a couple of these, and variant v rows, v row. Okay, we'll start with those two. Okay, so the first thing we do here, this is truly like a .NET ADO, an ADO.NET data source. So basically, there is a data table that's passed to us. It has a rows object, which is a collection, and then it has rows that are inside of that collection that we work with directly. So we need to create the COM structure basically for this. And if you'll notice, I'm not using the reference function. I want this to work all the way back to VDF 12. So I'm doing it the old-fashioned way. Okay. So that gets back the variant and then creates the object, and now we're going to link them together. And then we need to create one more object. For the actual data row. Okay, the next step is actually to load the data, and we're going to do that with a simple loop. Since you can have multiple ADO data sources, we have to say which one we're working with here. And we're actually going to use some of the Mertech.inc macros here to grab the data directly from SQL. Okay, so we can see that we're just going to go through all of the records in the items table here. And okay, we've got a question, so let me switch back over into Keynote here, and let's see. Okay, so Ken is asking, I have old reports with CDOs. Do I have to convert them to ADO, or will they work? You do not need to convert them at all for this. they will work just as they are right now. This is mostly to show new report development and some of the new features for new report development. CDO is still supported, but this is probably the last version of Crystal reports that will support it. They have basically gone in and pulled out the CDO support, and so actually we had to really work to get that working properly. It is working very well, and it's just as fast as it was before. But I would say for new report development, using ADO.NET is what they want you to do, and so that's why we wanted to illustrate this here. Okay, so we're just going to have a simple loop here, and now we're going to fetch our data into the UPC and ID variables. I need to go up here and create an ID variable. And now's where we actually go out on that and get our equivalent of the SOAP call here. So get product details, we pass the UPC, and we also need to add a product details variable up here. Okay, so now we have a place to fetch the data to. And basically what we're going to do is add one more variant up here. And this is going to be a variant array that contains the data for this record. So what we do is we basically just move the data from the return structure into the variant array here. So let's go ahead and do that. And if you'll notice, I'm moving it in, this is the data that basically we've laid out the structure for in XSD, in the XSD before. So I'm moving it basically into the same order that they are in the XSD. So we've got another question here. Let me go back in here. Clive asks if the ADO option has better performance than CDO. Up to the size that I've tested it, the performance between the two of them is about the same. I've tested with really, really large data sets and didn't see much difference that way. What I can tell you is that most of the time when you're using ADO or CDO, performance tends not to be much of an issue anyways, because normally when you're creating these in-memory structures, they're not large to begin with. Normally they're for small data sets anyways. So because it's all in memory, you don't want to create something that's, you know, just insanely large. I've tested up to somewhere around 200,000 rows and got good performance. After that, the performance starts to die off, but that's because I've, you know, used all of my available memory and I'm going into swapping and things like that. So next up here, if you link an ADO column, if you link to an ADO column, a parent table, can that column be an index? So the ADO concept, really, there isn't really anything in ADO.NET that deals with indexes. Because it's an in-memory structure, it's able to search it very quickly anyways, so there isn't really anything that's indexed there. I think maybe that's what you're getting at. But of course, if the parent table has an index and it's based on that, yes, that's fine, and you can do relational stuff in Crystal reports without any problem at all. So there isn't much of an issue there because of the fact it's an in-memory structure anyways. Okay, let's go back in here and we're just going to do a couple more of these. Next up is image URL. And after that, we did current price, if you'll recall. And last was the item ID. Let's see here. Actually, that one is not from there. Move ID to vdata 4. Okay, So now we've loaded the array with all the data from that we're going to need for the report. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to get a new row from the data table, and that returns us a variant object that we then have to link to this DataFlex object that we created up there so that we can actually access some methods off of it. So we created just one of them up there. We create the new row in the loop and then just connect to it over and over again as we loop through here. So we link the two of them there, and next up we use this call Okay, so let's go over these couple of lines here. So first up, set com item array is how you actually take the variant data and put it into the row object that we've created, and it does it all at once. So you don't have to deal with it on a column by column basis. It loads the entire array into the row object. Your array has to be structured in the same order as the XSD is laid out because it doesn't have any way in the variant of knowing what column maps where, so it does it in order. And that's why I moved the data up here exactly in the order that it is in the XSD file. And then this last line here, send com add of HO rows, the row, basically, so this added the data in, now we need to pass to the rows, we pass it the row object in, and that adds it into our ADO.NET data table. So that is about all we need to do. Let's go ahead and save this. We're going to go ahead and run this report and see how many typos I made. Looks like I may have gotten away without any typos. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this, and if we've done our job right, we should actually get a report. And here we go. We have created an ADO.NET report that easily. So as you can see here, if we go in and look at the data that is in here, this is my little fake table that replaces my SOAP call. You'll see in here it's actually returning me a UPC, the URL, product URL, price, and available at. And we've taken that as if it was coming from a SOAP call and basically created a report that loads dynamic images, has a barcode for each of the UPC lookups, and all of this data is coming directly from VDF, linking the item data to an ADO.NET data source. Want to let you guys know that we're unmuting everyone, so you have control of your mic. You can ask questions, direct.
Okay.
Optional, whatever that way. And in addition to that, right now we're also going to look at sorts. And with sorts, they can of course be permanently added into the reports, The way it was done in VDF before, they were actually added dynamically in your code. Now we're going to add them directly into the report. And we're going to use these two together, actually. Use parameters to control some permanent sorts. Kind of kill two birds with one stone on this. So, let's go ahead and close this. And we're going to go back in on our report here. And so the one of the reasons to use parameters in this case is because if we ever want to do anything where we have a read-only report, you can't set formulas dynamically. So if you're planning on using the new feature that we'll get to later of read-only reports, you really need to use parameters instead of using formulas. Now, your parameters can adjust formulas. That's just fine. There's no problem there. That works great. But you cannot, from your code, set formulas directly. So that's one of the reasons to go ahead and do this. So what we are going to do is go in and create two parameters. First one we're going to call sort choice, and this is going to have two options in here. The options are available at and price. So this is what column we'll be able to sort to. We're going to support sorting on either where it's available or the price of the column here. And then we're going to add another one called sort direction. And in here, we're going to do ascending and descending. Okay. So now we have our parameters. Those, in fact, could be passed, and if we were to run the report right now, it would come up and ask for them, but they're not actually doing anything yet. To make them do something, we have to do a couple more steps here. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to start by creating a formula that we're going to give it a formula that accesses that parameter. So we're going to create the first one called sort formula ascending. Okay, and in here, what we do is we're going to access the sort direction parameter. And I know this sounds backwards, but we're actually, even though we're calling it ascending, we do this. We don't really care. This could be any value that we pass in here, but we need it to get to the else parameter here, basically. So we start a switch case, and now we're going to access our other parameter. So if the sort choice is available at, then we are going to return upc.available at, and if the sort choice is price, we actually have to do a little function here to convert it to a string. We're going to return current price. And otherwise, we're just going to give it a fallback of available at. If nothing's passed in, that will get called instead. So we'll check our formula here. No errors are found. And we're actually going to copy this to the clipboard because we have to make just a minor change to it. And just follow me through this part. I'll explain what we're doing in just a moment. So we're going to add one more formula, sort formula descending. Okay. And in here, we're going to paste the exact same code, but we're going to change this to ascending. So these two are backwards of each other. Otherwise, they're identical. No errors found. Okay, so now we have these two formulas here. Now that we have formulas, we can actually go in to our sort expert and you'll see that these two formulas are listed. So we're going to add our first sort formula, ascending, and if you'll notice the sort direction is ascending, and then we'll add the descending one, and we're going to change the sort direction to descending. So one of these two sort formulas will be used based on this. These are the two sorts we supported. Okay, so we've got that in place now. We're going to go ahead and save that. So now what we need to do is modify our Visual Data Flex report to access these two parameters, and we'll show you how we access parameters, and it will actually adjust not only the sort direction, but which sort is used. So let's make sure, we have to make sure we close the report. Sometimes VDF doesn't like it if we run the application with the report open, so we'll just keep that closed. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back into the onInitialize report call, which right now just has this assign ADO data sources. And this is where we're going to add our code. Let's first go in and add a UI in here, though. So we're going to add a radio group in right here. Delete that. And we'll go to properties on it, and we're going to call this a sort group. And then we'll change our options here to available at and price. Okay. And then we'll change this to sort by. Okay. Make that look a little pretty. And then we're going to add a simple checkbox down below for the descending option. So what we'll do on that is we will call this sort descending. Since ascending is normally the sort option you want to use, we're going to call this sort descending. We'll just have a checkbox, turn that on, and we're going to name this sort direction. Okay, so now we have our UI. Let's go back into our code here and do what we need to do in onInitialize report to get this all linked up. We need to do one other little thing here just to make our lives a little easier and a little clearer. Let's see here. Okay, inside of our radio group, we're going to add a function.
Oh, it's Ken and Oliver and a bunch of other people. No, what's up? I know what he's doing right now.
I got someone unmuted right now. It sounds like you're on the phone, so we can all hear you. Just letting you know.
Okay, yeah, I'm on the Crystal conference call till supposedly 12:30.
Okay, so we're just creating a simple function here that's going to return the sort order to us. And then we're going to go back up into our onInitialize report and start writing some code in here. So we need a couple of variables here. Okay, the HO param is the key variable here, and that's how we're going to access the parameters that are stored in the report. So first thing we're going to do is get the check state of that. And then this is just for clarity's sake. What we're going to do is if that's set true, we are going to return that. Otherwise, we're going to return this, which is kind of the way it was done in the RDC method of Crystal. It's not really required here, but probably a lot of your reports are doing something similar to this right now, so we'll just follow the same method right now. Next up, we need to get the sort order. guess I didn't hit enter on that radio group. We'll just leave it the way it is. Okay, so now we get into the meat of this thing. So if the sort group is equal to 0, that means that we are dealing with wanting to use the available out sort, and if it's anything else, that means we want to use price. So what we do is we use this call, get param object by name, and we pass it sort choice, which is what we called our sort in Crystal, if you'll recall. And then to actually set what we want on this, it's as simple as send com add current value of that parameter, and we set it to available at, which is what we had set as one of the options available in there. And then also in here, we're going to call this again and get back, instead of the sort choice, we're going to get the sort direction. And if the sort direction is descending, then we're going to set it to descending as a string, which is what we had set it as here. Otherwise, we will set it to ascending, of course. Now, there are default values available on these parameters. In this case, we want to make sure that we set this in code even if the default is available. If you don't set it in code to something, then that parameter is actually going to pop up when you run the report and ask the user what they want it set to. So those are your two basic choices with parameters. Either you set them in code, even if you're setting it to just the default, or you allow it to pop up and let the user set it on the user interface that Crystal provides for it. So we're going to just copy this same code here, down in here, and instead we just change this to price, and otherwise everything is identical. So if we go ahead and run this now, see again if I've made any errors, any typos. Hey, it looks like I'm doing pretty good so far on these. I'm not making any typos. Okay, so available at, and we're going to say sort descending. So in this case, we should see, you can see we've got a little error in our report we need to go in and change. Available at is actually being covered right now, so we can't tell if it's working right. Let's go in and fix that real quick. So this is the option that controls that, can grow. And I actually had notes to remove this earlier in the process, but there is a bug in Crystal where can grow is not set when you initially create a picture, and after you hit OK, it is turned on. So you may come across the same thing. I didn't notice that it wasn't set because it wasn't initially. So we'll just go like that, save this, close our report, and go back in and rerun in VDF here. And now we should see it. Okay. So you can see here, JNR, we only have 2 locations that are supported for these products. They're JNR and Amazon. But you can see that we have a reverse sort on that right now. We can go in and rerun it against price, sort descending, and we should be able to see that the most expensive item is listed first and going down from there. So that is using parameters and using the new sort method instead of creating the sorts dynamically on the fly. Now, of course, the old methods are still available for all of this, and as you can see, there's a little bit more to this process than there was the other process, but there are all kinds of new options that are opened up when you use the parameters. And of course, with the new sorts, we want to do it so that we have access to some of the new sort features also. So that's how we do passing parameters in to a report. Now we're going to look at creating a little bit more capable parameter here that we're not going to pass in from the report. We're just going to show you how you do it in Crystal directly. Show you why you might want to do it. So this parameter is actually going to be a little bit of a wacky one. The parameter is going to be what's called a cascading parameter. Now, cascading parameters are a way of drilling down into your data set. The ideal place to look at a cascading parameter is actually not on a report quite like this. We're going to do one on here. But the ideal place is on a report that may include like country, state, city. The cascading parameter will allow you to have one single parameter that actually drills down into those three items and limits the values that are shown based on the prior items. So for instance, if you pick the United States, it's only going to show you the provinces or states in the United States, and then when you pick a state, it's only going to show you the cities in that state. So it gives you a way of having a drill down parameter in here. So we're going to go and create one called Sketch, and this is going to be a dynamic parameter instead of a static one. Now, the other parameters we created are static. The values were filled in right here. A dynamic parameter is going to have a data source as its parameter options. So in this case, the parameter that we're creating is going to be items at a store, either scheduled or unscheduled. Okay, and our first item is going to be purchased at, and our second item below that is going to be whether or not the item is scheduled. Okay, so both of these are from the item table, as you can see. Excuse me, and we're going to come in on the second one and create a parameter. What I'm doing here, so you have these drill down items. You don't actually have to create this is like a parent item here, or a parent parameter called Sketch. But then, since we're using a drill down data source here, you can actually create, excuse me, a parameter that is a child parameter of the master parameter here, just for the drill down item. So we're going to create one just for scheduled in this case. And then we're going to go in here, and you'll see we have a lot of options on each item in here that we can change. We're actually going to go in and change this. Now this is where the power of parameters comes in, because of course with formulas we couldn't do any of this. What we're going to do is we're going to say that this parameter for purchased is the one I wanted, is going to allow multiple values, and for scheduled we do not want to allow multiple values. And then okay, so, and allow discrete values, good. Okay, so what this is going to do for this item is it's going to allow you to pick multiple places that an item was purchased at as part of the parameter. So you'll see how this works in a minute here. Okay, so we've got our parameter now. Now we need to actually go in and link this parameter into the selection criteria of the report. And the way we do that is in here. We're going to go in and link it. We're going to link this parameter that we just created to this field. You can see that parameter is listed here. So basically, this is making the parameter do something now. Before this, it didn't do anything. It would bring up a UI, but it didn't actually adjust the report in any way. This is actually where we're linking it to do something on the report. We're going to do something as simple as that and save it. Now we're not going to do anything on the VDF side. We're just going to go in and run the report. And we'll just set it to price and ascending in this case. Doesn't really matter much. Okay, so you can see here we have this panel that Crystal's given us here to pick what we want this parameter set to. If you had gone in and grabbed this parameter in VDF and set it using code, you wouldn't see this at all, and it would automatically pick those items based on what your code has. In this case, we don't have that issue at all. It's bringing it up. We're going to pick Amazon and add it. Okay, now if you'll notice here, there's a separate piece down here, interscheduled. Okay, and interscheduled is a dependent child cascading parameter. And as you can see, the options are no. What that means is that for all the records that we have in the item table that show a purchase stat of Amazon, none of them are are what I'm calling a scheduled item. So if we were to go in and add the Apple Store in here and drop down the list, you'll see that our interscheduled list has changed because some of the items that are listed under Apple Store apparently are scheduled. So we're given both options here. This is the exact same way it would work. If we were doing this with city, state, zip, you would be able to pick possibly multiple items here if you allowed it, and then the dependent items would adjust dynamically based on that. So we're going to pick both of those items and scheduled value of no and run the report, and you can see here that our report is now limited based on those items. So if we were to add in a column, so let's go in and just do that, take a peek. We're going to go into the report here, throw on right in here, scheduled, save it, and we will rerun the report now. Okay, we're going to pick both of these and scheduled of no. Okay, and you'll see that on our report here, the only options we have are no. So it's limited the report based on that second cascading item down. That is cascading reports. That's how you use them. Now, on the VDF side, you could pass what you wanted for the item in just the same way we did before. I'm actually not going to illustrate that right now, but you could pass that in from VDF just as easily. So that's cascading items. There are many other places you can use these. I'm certain you guys will think of all kinds of interesting ways to use them if you haven't already. So let's go in and take a look at our next item in the list here. Next item in the list is actually going to be multilingual reports. We're not going to go in and change this report to be a multilingual report because it does require quite a bit of work, but we're going to look at one that's already been done. The key to a multilingual report is that the labels need to be formula fields. And of course, the translation isn't done automatically. You have to provide all the translations for your labels. But you can have it adjust the report based on computer settings, or you can make the report language an item that you pick. You'll also note here that a workaround is required for using sorts. Let's go and take a look at what it actually looks like when we do this. So we're going to open another report from this workspace, property by category. This one has a graph on it, as you can see. And if you'll notice, all of our report labels are not just labels of text. They are actually formula fields that I've dragged onto the report. So what we do is we have, and of course if you were at eDuke you saw some of this, but if you'll go in and look at these formula fields that I have for the different titles, you can see they're very simple. They all have essentially the same code to them where basically they just are returning the string after evaluating another formula. And that key formula is this one called set display strings. So let's see if I can drag this up and show you a bit of what this looks like. So in this case, I go out and I get whatever the locale of the report is set to. That can be set by the system, or it can be set otherwise. And as you can see in here, what I do is I check what the locale is, and then I just have my, in this case, 5 strings in all the different languages at however Google translated them for me. And I return that for my string, and of course, I actually just set a variable is what I do, and then in the report I access that variable and return that, and all of a sudden the report will take on that language. Now on the VDF side of things, we have to do a little bit more work. There's a couple of pieces to the multilingual support. The first piece of it is the actual previewer user interface, which supports a whole bunch of languages. That has to be set. The way we do that is during on-display report, we go in and we set the product locale to French, German, Spanish, English, whatever language we want, and we use the 2-digit country code for that. So this is how we handle setting the report viewer to the proper language. For actually telling the report that it's in a different language is a little bit different case, and in fact right now it's it requires some pretty low-level work. What I'm basically doing is overriding part of the setup of Flex2Crystal, and I'm replacing it, because what you actually have to do is before you go in and create your report object, you have to set a parameter that tells it what language the report is going to be in, but it has to be done very early in the report process. So this is actually, I'm not going to go through exactly the detail of how this is working. If you want to do this, I'd be happy to go over it with you and send it to you. In future versions, we'll probably make this a little bit nicer. We actually have to go in and override some parameters in here when the report is created, also to pass the locale in. So it's a little bit of a complex process right now. But the takeaway on this is that it can be done, and you just have to do some setup to get it right in here. And if you'll notice on this one, rather than grabbing the system locale, I have this report set up to use a it's not rendering my code on this one for some reason right now. I have it set up to use a combo list in this case. So you can actually pick from a drop-down list what you want the language set to, and this code will go in and set it. When we go ahead and run this, I can go in here and say German, for instance. And you can see that the UI has changed to German, and of course my report has changed to German also, using the labels that I passed in. Of course the actual data is still in English in this case, but you can make all of the labels for a report in whatever language you want. And in fact, you'll notice that it also changed all of my values for pricing here to euros. So it even went in and changed the actual separator on the data here. So all of that can be done. If you notice, I have sorts here. Now, this was the other thing I mentioned, that when you use multilingual support, Crystal doesn't really have a great solution for this. So I want to just give you this little tip if you're going in to do this. Normally, the way you would set a sort, if we were to go in here and grab an item, let's just shrink this one down a bit. We were to go in and grab an item, for instance. This is a standard label. We can right-click on a label and say bind sort control. And this is how we get those nice little sort buttons on the user interface that lets us sort dynamically right in the report. These are not labels. They are actually formula. And if you'll notice, that bind sort control is missing here. So how did I get them over here? Well, the way I got it is I put an empty text object behind the formula, and I bound the sort control to the empty text object. So that allowed me to get the sort control on a multilingual report. It's the only way of doing it. It's not documented at all. So if I pull this out, you'll see that it's totally separate from my item here. It's just an text box that I'm putting around it. But that's how you can get sort controls in a multilingual report pretty easily. So let's go in here. Okay. So if any of you, like I had mentioned, if anyone needs the multilingual support, I can send you off the code for that. It's pretty easy once you get the code in place to change that as you see fit. The last item that we're going to take a look at this morning is the restraints that you need to use for designing for read-only. Now, we've already done some of these things, but the real clincher in this whole thing is the last item I list here. So you can't create sorts on the fly, you can't create formula fields or selection formula on the fly. None of that can be done, but we use parameters to get around all of that. Our ADO.NET report actually, as of right now, cannot be made read-only. And the reason is that you can't set data source locations dynamically in your code on a read-only report. So let me illustrate this. I'm going to go in on our replace pricing here. Let me show you how to create a read-only report. I'm not going to save that one. We're going to open this one. And the way you do it is you go to export the report, actually. It seems like an odd place to go, but this is where you go. And you pick Crystal Reports Read-Only. And if you notice here, it brings up all of my parameters. We don't really care about any of them. It actually might make us pick one. Let's see here. Get past it. Okay, so it's going to make us pick something here. So we're going to go in and pick something. It doesn't really matter. These parameters aren't going to be saved at all. It just is requiring them here. Just that one. Okay. So that's just something that it asks you. We're going to be replacing all of those anyways, so those don't really matter in this case. Those parameters, the reason it asks you about that is one of the other uses of read-only reports is so that you could hand out a report that's in a certain state to someone else, and they could run that report in that state with data saved into the report, but not be able to edit the report or change other things. That's not how we're using it in this case. Okay, so we're saving it as read-only report here. Just go ahead and hit save. Then we're going to go into our report, and all we need to do to access it in VDF is change this to an R. And we're going to, let's close this and rerun. Now this is going to fail. This is what I want to illustrate to you, and there's a good reason to show this to you right now that I'll go into in a second here. Doesn't matter what options I pick. Okay, here's the error I get. COM object invocation error, illegal operation on Crystal Reports read-only report. So if I go in and hit debug, part of assigning the ADO data source is this call, send com set data source. Read-only reports cannot use this call. So I get an error the minute I try and use a read-only report that gets into the set data source call. As you're going through and trying to use read-only reports, what you can do is, in fact, change your report to read-only, run it, and see what errors you get to know what can't be done. Crystal hasn't done a very good job of documenting what can't be done. So some of the things that they had listed, I've listed everything they have, but there have been a couple of random things that also haven't worked for me. Like, for instance, the selection formula, they don't list as something you can't do. They list formula fields, but not selection formula. So some of these things, you know, I just had to figure out on my own, and as you go through your reports, you'll have to do the same sort of thing here, where you just try it and see if it works, to know if there's any options that you're using that aren't allowed in read-only reports. Unfortunately, that documentation just isn't very good. So as you can see, this report is not read-only capable, so we'll remove that. But the property by category report is, because I'm not trying to set the data source on this one at all. So we will go in and export this one. And it's actually already there. We'll just overwrite it. Okay. The report actually exports with data in it, but it will refresh the data on the fly if it has access to the database that is used in the report. So in this case, this report had a very small data set available in it. If I was to send this report to you, to any of you, and you ran it, you would actually see data, but it's not data that's coming from my database. It's data that's been saved into the report directly. So basically, you can send a report to someone that way that has data embedded in it for them to look at. If the database is accessible, it's going to refresh and use that data instead. So let's go in on this report now. And like I said, it's pretty easy to switch it to read-only. All we have to do is that. And oh, how about we pick Spanish this time? Okay, here we go. This report, dynamic options, set on the fly, read-only report, no problem. So as you can see, it's actually pretty easy to work with read-only reports. And let me show you what makes them, to show you what actually happens here. If I go into Crystal here and tell it to list all files and pick the read-only report, you'll notice that it doesn't even have a file association. The Crystal Report Designer can't read read-only reports, period. It can't read them in a view-only mode at all. You actually have to have just a separate Crystal viewer to access the RPTR files, or of course your application can access them. But the Crystal Report Designer can't access them. It can only create them. And if you'll notice, if I try to, it even tells me so. Please use the Reports Viewer 2011, the .NET Report Viewer, which is what we're using, or a server-based viewer to access our PTR files. So, and if I were to go in and rename that .rptr file to .rpt, it would see that it's a read-only one and still wouldn't work with it. So, you know, they have done a pretty good job that way. There is no way of accessing it. So when you ship read-only reports, you know, you need to make sure that you ship just that RPTR file and not your original RPT file, of course, if you're trying to protect anything that way. So the one last thing I wanted to show you is actually going back a bit. I wanted to show you a little bit more about this XSD file before we finish up. So the XSD file, let me switch over here, is simply an XML file. And so we're creating this for you. And as you'll see here, it's not a very complex XML file, but it has a few elements in it that you may not expect to see as we go through here. It's not something that you can necessarily go out and create by hand. It actually has a lot of capabilities related to having multiple tables supported in it and lots of extended data types. As you can see here, the data type that we called system.string is internally called xs:*string, and coming down you'll see xs decimal, and xsint is our system.int32. So like I said, this probably isn't a file you want to try and create on your own. With TTX files you could get away with it. A TTX file is very simple in comparison to this. So, but the fact that it required Visual Studio to create, and even in Visual Studio, it was a complex process because of the amount of XML that gets embedded here. That's why we went ahead and have created this XSD generator tool. So that's something that will be coming out with a future version of Flex2Crystal pretty soon here, so that you can actually start working with this. You are able to go in and tweak some of these items in here in our demo workspace if you want to link to somewhere else until that is released. And if you have Visual Studio, it is not too insanely difficult to go in and create one. It just requires knowing where to click. So we want to create an XML schema in this case is what we're looking for. And as you can see here, it basically leaves us with this generic interface to use. And I somehow pasted code in there. So not very usable this way even right now. They actually do have another tool that if you create a full project you can get into, but basically they give you a code helper when you're in here, and you're more or less on your own from here. So that's why we took the time to create that other tool. It can be done in Visual Studio, but it's pretty difficult. So look for that to be coming out. So that's all the major items we wanted to go over in this webinar. We've gone over the read-only reports, multilingual reports, sorts, using parameters, ADO.NET, and of course the demo workspace. Now what's going to happen going forward is we actually have created a step-by-step guide that follows this webinar along that you'll be able to get after the webinar. Hopefully it'll be up pretty quick. That you can follow along to recreate what we've done during this webinar here. It'll have the Mertech demo workspace with it. And it will have SQL local DB. We're going to give you some documentation on how to go ahead and get that all set up and installed. Of course, if you already have SQL Server on your machine, you can just attach to the database, and we'll give you instructions on doing that also. Of course, we will give you the some new additional documentation related to how all of this can be used in your applications. So look for that to come in the future. Are there any additional questions from anybody now that we're done? Is there anything that you that I kind of went over too fast, or the conversion from CDO to ADO? If you already have reports that are based on CDO, really, if you aren't trying to use some feature that CDO doesn't support, like for instance, space and field names is something that that some people wanted to use. We've actually added support for that even into Flex2Crystal. So you know, the only reason really to move to ADO is for new report creation, or of course if you want all of your reports standardized the same. The ADO interface, of course, is going to be the interface going forward that Crystal wants you to use also. Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, we'll end this now. Thank you all so much for attending. Like I said, you'll be getting an email from us with more details about doing all of this on your own, and some additional documentation on that. And hope to see you guys next time. We've got a lot of great new things coming in Flex2Crystal, so make sure you keep reading those emails that we're sending out with more details of stuff. And I'll talk to you guys soon.